Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live discussion and live podcast interview for Transformation Ground Control, which is a weekly podcast that we publish each Wednesday. New episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also find it on any podcast platform where you might listen to podcasts. You can also find it streaming to wherever you're watching right now. So thanks for being here today. Today's topic is inside the ERP software Cartel, a topic I'm super excited about. We're going to try and pull back the curtain a bit on how the industry works and what some of your alternatives are in terms of how to navigate some of the biases and cartel-esque sorts of behaviors that are prominent here in the ERP software industry. I'll introduce our guest here in just a moment, who I'm excited to have on here, first-time guest on this show. Very excited to have him on. But before I do that, a couple logistical things. One is, I already mentioned, this is part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. Every Wednesday, new episodes. This live discussion that you are part of here today will get edited and repurposed, and we'll add content to it and make it part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that comes out a week from tomorrow on Wednesdays. And also, we have a global digital transformation community here, so I always love to hear where you're joining from today. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat what city and country you're in here today, I'd love to hear from you and love to see where you're joining. And in addition to letting us know where you're joining from today, I'd love to hear your comments and questions as we go here. We'll probably ask you some questions, but we'd love to hear questions from you, the audience, and see what comments or questions you have along the way. This is a topic that's bound to stimulate quite a bit of conversation, so I'm hoping that you all chime in here. So with all that being said, what we thought we'd do is talk about inside the ERP software Cartel. And with me, joining me today is Sebastian from Rimini Street. So Sebastian, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. Myself and our company, and most importantly, many of our clients have listened to a lot of your podcasts and YouTube videos and read your reports in the past, and we thought they're very informative. So I'm delighted to actually be on your show and talk to this wonderful audience and see if we can have a great discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, glad to have you here today. And, you and I have had, you and I are part of what I think you coined this term, so I'm going to steal it from you and pretend like it's mine, but it's actually your term. But when you and I have talked before, we've talked about how we're sort of the resistance. We're the resistance within the ERP software space because we're both independent and fairly agnostic, and we're not part of the machine. But tell us a little bit about Rimini Street. Who are you guys, and how are you part of the resistance within the space here?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So Rimini Street, our primary business is to provide third-party support for SAP and Oracle software. Our pricing model is really simple. We're 50% off of your annual maintenance bill that you currently pay with SAP and Oracle, and you typically discontinue or stop your maintenance with SAP and Oracle and replace it with Rimini Street when you come to us. Now, in the last few years, our clients have been asking us to provide more of what I'll call a whole product, as Jeffrey Moore described in his 1991 book that I know you're a big fan of, Crossing the Chasm, which was our Bible when I was at a company called PeopleSoft from 1993 to 2000. Our whole management team read that book. We had Jeffrey Moore in all the time to talk to us. And this was back in the older days. We were one of the first companies at PeopleSoft to do client server software, and we were really excited about this. So taking that concept of the whole product in Jeffrey Moore's book, at Rimini Street, we added application management services and consulting around SAP and Oracle products, and also application management services for Salesforce. We also have many security products and services, as well as interoperability products and services, and monitoring solutions, which we believe provide the whole ERP product for our clients. And this is really important because those other things that we've added around our core product are growing pretty fast. Now, we're a $410 million company in our annual revenue run rate, and that's grown from 30 million when I joined the company 12 years ago as the president. We started Rimini Street in 2005, supporting Siebel and JD Edwards and PeopleSoft applications. And then we added Oracle Database and Middleware and SAP and others. And Oracle Database and Middleware and SAP are the majority of our revenue because it's the largest target addressable market. You've got many more customers running those applications and databases than you do JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, and Siebel these days. Now, what I'm most proud of, for instance, is in just the last quarter, we closed nearly 9,000 support cases. We delivered 7,000 tax, legal, and regulatory updates across 22 countries, and we received an average client satisfaction rating on support delivery of more than 4.9 on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest we could get. And I started my career at Accenture, which was Anderson Consulting back in the day, and we rated everything. And if we could get like a 4.5 out of 5, that was great. So I'm really grateful that we get a 4.9 rating from our clients. And our clients provide survey responses on about 35% of the cases that we solve, which is kind of an unheard of response rate in the industry as well.
Interesting. That's great. And that's a lot of growth, going from 30 million to 400 plus in your 12 years there. So I guess it begs the first question about Rimini and sort of setting the stage for this whole conversation. So essentially what you guys do is you provide third-party support. And I think a lot of buyers, a lot of enterprise software buyers assume that when you go buy software, you have to use the vendor, right? You have to use SAP or Oracle or Salesforce or whoever to provide that support. But you guys have proven and created a model that says, well, hey, hold on, there are alternatives to that vendor direct support. Is that a fair summary of what you guys do? Is third-party independent support?
Yeah. And we're not the only ones that do it. And there are companies like us that do it for IBM and do it for Microsoft. So there's a big third-party support industry that kind of spawned from the third-party hardware industry. So the third-party hardware support industry has been around for longer than the software support industry, where you could buy, used equipment from Cisco or IBM or other, and there was a lot of companies that did that. But the third-party support industry is newer, but we've been around since 2005.
Okay, gotcha.
And we're the biggest in this space.
So I've got to ask before I get into my real questions here, what do the big ERP vendors like SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, some of the ones you mentioned here, what do they think of you guys? Do they welcome the alternatives in the market here? Are you a threat? Are you a problem? What's the perception of you?
Well, it's a tough thing. I think, and I've worked for some companies where we really owned a market. We were kind of a monopoly and customers had no choice. And, when you're in a situation like that, you can rest on your laurels and you can kind of not focus as much. So I think by having competition in any space, it keeps the incumbent sharp, it keeps us sharp, and most importantly, it provides choice for the clients. Now, I think in some ways, look, SAP and Oracle make a lot of money on their annual maintenance with massive profit margins, over 90%. So from that perspective, they don't like anybody undercutting or providing maintenance for a lesser price than they do, and essentially taking some of their customers away from them. But if these customers would have moved to another product line, maybe a positive note is we keep them on the Oracle and SAP product line because we really love Oracle and SAP products. They're great products. It's just that the support, a lot of customers question, am I getting my value, my money's worth in how much I'm paying for annual support versus what I'm getting for that.
Right. Yeah, so you're giving an alternative and giving an option to customers of these big products. So some may be wondering, why is this topic for today? Why is it called Inside the ERP Software Cartel? What is the ERP Software Cartel? I didn't know it existed or whatever. So
I didn't make that term up, but let's talk about that for a little bit. So I've heard this term over the years, and I think I saw it published, this cartel term regarding ERP software vendors for the first time in a report in 2018. My basic understanding about it is if you think about the whole ERP ecosystem, the massive amount of money that's made in the ERP ecosystem is when customers have to do massive projects. So if you think about the systems integrators and the software vendors, they want you to constantly upgrade because that's where the majority of their revenue come from, where they're doing these really big projects. So for SAP, there's a big move to want to migrate everybody from their flagship ECC6 product to S/4HANA, which Eric, I know your company has a lot of expertise in that area as well. And that's the major revenue in the ERP ecosystem. Now, This is the revenue that the software vendors and systems integrators primarily get. And I think it creates this false sense of hype around constantly having to upgrade to purportedly get very valuable new features and functionality. Many customers question the ROI on these massive projects, and they are massive because sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say, and the value proposition does not justify the total cost of ownership. The problem's further exacerbated when you look at the SAP and Oracle product support policies, which are typically 5 years from general availability or GA date of the product, which causes forced upgrades just to stay supported. And these upgrades are very, very expensive.
Yeah. Now, what about in the cloud environment with a lot of customers moving to public and private cloud, S/4HANA and Oracle Fusion and whatnot? How does your model fit within the cloud environment versus the legacy on-prem maintenance model?
Yeah. Well, if you are truly subscription, if you're on a subscription-based version of these products where maintenance and license fees are included, there is no maintenance piece that we can be 50% of. But
Right.
we do a lot of work around Salesforce.com where we're not competing with Salesforce.com. We're actually a partner, and we do managed services around Salesforce.com. Now, if I look at SAP, I believe Gartner published a report in Q1 of 23 that talked about the current state of affairs with customers moving from ECC6 to S/4HANA. And I believe 2/3 of the ECC6 customer base has not licensed any S/4HANA as of that date. And 80% of the people that licensed S/4HANA, they licensed the on-prem version. So the on-prem version does have a maintenance piece to it. And these are versions like, if I look at, I've got a sheet here, S/4HANA 1511, which came out in November 2015, S/4HANA 1610, which came out in October 16, S/4HANA 1709, which came out in September of 2017. You see the numbering convention is basically the year and then the month. So 1709 is September of 2017. Then 1809 came out in September of 2018. Those 1, 2, 3, 4 releases, 3 of them, 1511, 1610, and 1709, are not supported today. 1809 goes out of support at the end of 2023. So here you are, you've got, let's say, early adopter S/4HANA customers that did the right thing by SAP, and they upgraded to their S/4HANA platform, and they're already out of support all over again, and they've got to do another massive upgrade. But what's complicating it this time is the upgrade to S/4HANA. If they took the on-prem version, SAP is putting a lot of pressure on companies to go to the private cloud or the public cloud version through their rise or grow model where they manage everything. And if they don't do that, they may not get access to things like generative AI, new features and functionality, which are still in their nascency. But there's been a lot of articles published recently from the SAP user group in Germany, the DSAG, where I've seen them very, very up in arms about this change, where all these customers did the right thing and they went live on S/4HANA, and now they have to face a massive rip and replace upgrade again just to stay supported and just to get the new features. And it might be rip and replace if they have to go from the on-prem version to, let's say, the public cloud version. And the public cloud version, you cannot bring your customizations across, but on the private cloud version and the on-prem version, which is very similar software, you can bring your customizations across. So this is causing a lot of chaos in the SAP community today, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like, one way I describe not just the SAP community, but a lot of the ERP vendors are doing this, especially the bigger ones. They're essentially holding a gun to their customer's head and saying, we're going to stop supporting this product. You need to move to product X by whatever date. And it sounds like what you guys are doing is you're basically, in my opinion, this is my interpretation of where you guys can add value, and companies like Rimini Street can add value, is you're sort of giving customers a way to push the gun away from their head and say, hold on a second, we've got options here. We can, if you're not willing to give us support, we've got a third party that can, and that gives us a little bit extra time to figure out what we're going to do to where we can upgrade our technology however we need to on our pace, not on the vendor's, timeline. Is that how you see yourself, or is that part of the value you guys are providing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big part of the value. And in fact, we contractually guarantee in our contracts that we'll support any version of SAP or Oracle that you're running for 15 years from the day that you sign a contract with us. That's a one-way guarantee. You don't have to guarantee you're going to be with us for 15 years, but we say if you want to renew with us every year, we will guarantee that we'll support that version. And what it does is it just gives people time to take a huge deep breath and have some flexibility. And if I look at Oracle, and I've got a whole bunch of Oracle releases here, I've got this, I don't know if you've all ever seen this, but this is the Oracle lifetime support policy. You could print this off. It's for Oracle technology products like Oracle Database. And if I look at the dates that Oracle database versions were GA'd, we have a ton of clients that are on Oracle 11G database or Oracle 12C database, and not as many that are on Oracle 19C database, which is the current long-term release. Just to give you a frame of reference, how customers are running these old applications, and they're working perfectly fine. 11G came out GA in August 2007. That's 16 years old. 12.1 Enterprise Edition came out GA in June of 2013. 12.2 came out in March of 2017. So let's take 12.2 as an example. It came out in March of 2017. It's a great release. Customers run it and love it. 11G and 12C, we find that many customers that we talk to, 70-80% of their thousands of database instances are on these releases like 11G and 12C. And they're not supported from Oracle. And by the way, if they're not supported from Oracle, in the same lifetime support policy, it says what support doesn't, sustaining support is what it's in. So it moves from primary support to extended support to sustaining support. Sustaining support does not include new updates, fixes, security alerts, data fixes, or critical patch updates. Many customers have no idea that that's the situation with sustaining support. So when they come to a company like Rimini Street, we will provide them security solutions. We've got a great advanced database security product. We will support the product for 15 years from the day you come with us, not the GA date. So a lot of customers buy themselves a lot of time instead of just doing these forced upgrades just to stay supported.
That's interesting. So a lot of what you guys are doing is helping support the customization that a lot of customers have developed and used as part of their secret sauce as an organization over the years. And I think that's a really interesting point, in terms of when you look at sort of the maintenance of base, the base code and sort of the vanilla off the shelf part of the software versus the custom code, which I know customization is a bad word. We're never supposed to do it. But the reality is organizations do it, and they have reasons for doing it in many cases. And you're giving an option to support that customization going forward. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. If you look at, I talked about those nearly 9,000 cases we resolved last quarter. Roughly about 70% of those cases are on custom code, interfaces, integrations, performance tuning, how-to questions. And this also sheds some light on the vendor maintenance policy, which for the most part just supports the base code. Once the base code's been GA or in production for a couple years, does it really break? What causes software to break is you change the code or you change the data. So it sees a new condition that it's never been tested for before. And when you think about it, all the problems that you have, they're in interfaces and integrations with other products. They're in your custom code, like your SAP ABAP customizations and Z programs, or your Oracle database performance tuning. And this is where you really need to have extremely skilled people. So we've decided that we would not have level 1, level 2 people on our help desk. We just have level 3 on people on our help desk, and we pay them a lot of money, and they're 46 years old on average, and they typically come from SAP or Oracle development or consulting or a systems integrator or a company where they had deep skills, 10, 15, 20 years on Oracle or SAP. And our philosophy behind that is we want to fix it, and we want to fix it right, and we want to fix it once, and we want to get to the root cause analysis so that problem doesn't happen again for us or the customer, because it saves us money and it saves them money. I'm seeing some great questions in the chat too, by the way.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in here. First of all, I want to thank everyone who dropped in the chat where you're joining from today. We've got people all over the world here, from everywhere from UK to Denver to UAE to Belgium, Johannesburg. So thank you for everyone for joining wherever you are today. So a lot of good questions here. We're stimulating some good questions, but I have to ask this one because I think this is a really interesting question. I'd love to hear your perspective. And this is from Samir on LinkedIn. And Samir says, "Hello, Eric. How are you?" Samir from India. "What is the future of SAP S4 HANA TMS?" And maybe I'll just chop off that last part and just say, what is the future of SAP S4 HANA? And you talk about the chaos in the industry and this transition to public and private cloud S4 HANA and the forced upgrades, all this stuff. If you sort of back up for a second and just look at the lay of the land of where we are, what do you think the future of the SAP ecosystem and the product itself is?
Okay, so let's start with almost every company we talk to. They want to go cloud. They want to go digital, right? And it makes sense. And you look at all the incredible things that are happening with AI. AI, in my opinion, and machine learning might help cure cancer someday. I really honestly believe that. So I have a computer science degree from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I was taking AI classes 30 some years ago or 40 years ago, and it kind of went nowhere. And now it's all of a sudden the hottest thing in the world, and everybody's AI, and some of it's hype and some of it's reality, but it's a good thing. So people want to get there, right? But the other thing that's driving a lot of this move to the cloud for the software vendors is companies like Salesforce and Workday have proved that this model is very successful. And if you look at Salesforce that does CRM software and Workday that does human capital management software, companies that run that type of software essentially kind of do it the same way. Everybody does CRM the same way. Everybody does HCM the same way within reason. And that's a very broad general statement I made, I know, right? But they've been very successful, and they have created true cloud SaaS multi-tenant software. Multi-tenant means that every company gets the same version of the software, and they don't get to customize it. They have to take 3 or 4 releases a year, but they get to quote unquote configure it. So that's how they make it work for their company. So they don't get too much of this technical debt. They don't have this problem of being on a release for 10, 15, 20 years. When you take a look at like SAP and Oracle, and I'll say SAP in particular, let's talk about S/4HANA. SAP does manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory software. They've got over 200 different modules and industry solutions. And the way a chemical manufacturer versus a discrete manufacturer does inventory and supply chain and distribution are completely different. So can you really kind of cookie cutter and build a product that everybody uses the same way and has no customizations, which is the promise of SAP's public cloud? But let's take a look at some statistics. So from this Gartner Q1 23 report, 67% of SAP ECC customers, approximately 23,400, have not purchased any S/4HANA licenses yet. There's 21,500 S/4HANA customers. 8,600 migrated from ECC. 12,900 were new clients that didn't run SAP before, which typically means that they're smaller companies and they're going with like a greenfield approach. So that's 60% of the new clients on S/4HANA. Only 1,000 are the S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition, which is really, that would be the equivalent of the Salesforce or the Workday multi-tenant. But it's really hard to make that version work, is my understanding, Eric, for big customers. And I know you've got a lot of experience in this because you work with a lot of these big customers. 2,900 are on RISE. Private Cloud Edition, 82% of those related to businesses with annual revenue of less than $5 billion. So there's some statistics of where we stand in Q1 23. I think Gartner publishes this report every quarter, so it's good data.
Right.
Somebody asked me to repeat the figures on the numbers, so I'm going to do that again. 67% of ECC customers have not purchased any S/4HANA licenses yet. Of the 21,500 S/4HANA customers, 8,600 migrated from ECC, but 12,900 are net new clients. 1,000 only are on the S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition. Now, what's causing all this major change and problems in the SAP customer base is that SAP is starting, I'm hearing things like they may even charge you a 30% uplift if you want access to the AI features, and you got to get them on public cloud or the private cloud version. You have to do it through their Rise or Grow program. So it's very precarious what's going on right now. And a lot of our SAP customers want this. Oh, and here's the other problem that I didn't even mention. SAP ECC 6, if you're on Enhancement Pack 5 or below, support's expiring in 2025. If you're on Enhancement Pack 6 or above, 6, 7, or 8, support's expiring in 2027. So all these clients are worried about having to be forced upgrades just to stay supported, or they could come to a Rimini Street and take their time until maybe SAP gets one code set. Having these two code sets, one code set that's essentially on-prem and private cloud, and another code set that's public cloud, how is SAP going to maintain those two code sets? Eventually, it seems it has to become one code set. So many customers are taking a wait and see attitude until SAP actually gets one code set. We understand what the rules are. Is it possible? Does the software work on public cloud? Can I actually get there if I'm a $10 billion manufacturing company? And if not, it might be more cost effective and less risky for me to stay right on ECC 6 until everybody gets their act together.
Yeah. Well, and that's, it's an interesting question here, a follow-up that's sort of tied to this here from Philip on LinkedIn. Philip says, is SAP Public Cloud a growing market? I think you said 1,000 customers have gone to the SAP Public Cloud. And you're also saying that
the Public Cloud Edition.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what's interesting. People think they're moving to the cloud with S/4HANA because it's SAP's cloud product, but only 1,000 of those 21,500 have moved to the Public Cloud Edition.
Right. The others are in the private cloud, which is essentially that hybrid of, it's not on-prem, but it's also their own instance of the software that they can still customize or do it.
That's right. That's right. And you can, and it's hard when the customer is customizing the code, which they really need to do in many cases. So I don't know what the future is going to be, Eric. I don't know how this is going to shake out. Frankly, I would love to see SAP make this work like Salesforce and Workday did on the public cloud version. And Rimini Street can have a massive business to help move customers from ECC 6 to S/4HANA Public Cloud. And remember, we built those AMS services and consulting services. So we thought there was going to be a massive move, and we're not seeing it yet. And I don't know how it's going to shake out.
Yeah. Yeah. On one hand, you could make an argument that because 67% of ECC customers have not invested in S/4HANA yet, on one hand, that says, okay, well, that's a big market, right? Maybe that wait and see attitude that you're saying customers seem to have, which I agree with, SAP's response to try and get them off, to rock those opportunities off center is to say, okay, well, what if we cut off maintenance, at a certain point, then, you basically have no choice. Now you have to go to S/4HANA. It seems like that's, that's a strategy for sure. I don't know that it's in customers' best interest by any means, but that seems to be the approach that SAP and Oracle and even Microsoft's doing something similar with Great Plains customers and old Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics AX customers and things of that nature. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, this is I'm seeing some great comments in the chat here about, Christian Klein making announcements at the DSAG and how you won't get generative AI. It'll only be facilitated for the public cloud or private Rise edition. Here's some other challenges. So, and I've got some recommendations as well. You published a great 12-minute video, Eric, that I loved, which talked about the way I read between the lines is an unprecedented amount of S/4HANA implementation failures, where companies are actually shutting down the projects.
Right.
And they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. So let's do some math. Let's say that you've spent, let's say you're a big company, 10 billion, $20 billion company, and you spent $100 million to try to go live on SAP S/4HANA, any version, public cloud, private version, private cloud, on-prem, and you couldn't get there and you failed. And you're in year 3 of a $10 million a year annual SAP contract, a subscription contract for cloud, which includes maintenance and licenses, right? And you've pulled the plug on the project. So you're 100 million in, and now you've got to also pay 10 million a year for the next 3 years, and you're not using the software.
Right.
Why license for the whole organization?
Yeah.
And why do these 5-year lock-in contracts? The other thing that people do is they'll trade or they'll give up their ECC6 licenses, but they'll sign a contract with SAP that says they're forced to be live on the public on one of the S/4HANA versions within 2 years, or they lose these on-prem perpetual software licenses that they paid a lot of money for. Why do that? Why can't you negotiate something where you say, okay, in good faith, I'm going to try to get to one of these S/4HANA versions. I'm going to implement it for, let's say, 5 or 10% of my company, like my corporate functions, or one of my GOs, or one of my business units. And together, me, the customer, my systems integrator, and SAP are going to be on the hook to make this work. And if we can make it work for that 5 or 10%, which is a lot less than $100 million blown investment, let's say it's 5 million, and we can prove the concept together, we get to do more. And oh, by the way, if it doesn't work and I have to pull the plug after that POC, I get to go back to my on-prem ECC6 and stay there until I figure out how to make this work. Now, in all fairness to SAP and everybody, I don't want the listeners to get us wrong. It's not SAP's fault every time a project doesn't work.
Right.
There's the systems integrator, there's the customer, and there's SAP. The software has to work. The systems integrator has to implement it right. The customer has to have the correct requirements. You know, everybody has a role in this to make it work. But for whatever reason, there's been a lot of failures. So what we all can agree on is there's a high level of risk when you're taking on a massive project like this. So wouldn't it make sense to minimize your risk by only licensing for a small portion of your company to prove the concept?
Right. Yeah. And, it's everything you're describing. I think, it's sort of, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, the last couple of years, and how, in 25 years in this space, I'd be curious to see if you agree or disagree with this statement. But in my opinion and my perception of being in the space for 25 years is I've never seen this sort of, I'm going to call a spade a spade. I think it's reckless behavior on the part of big software vendors. And I think, to your point, yeah, it's not their fault in some ways. They're trying to sell software. That's their job, is to sell software. They're trying to converge the code to one solution, like you said, one version of the code. You can't have 5 different versions floating out there. You've got to consolidate and get everyone there eventually. But the way they're setting these deadlines and these incentives they're creating for customers, yes, the customers are complicit. To your point, they're not looking at alternatives. They're not saying, hey, hold on a minute, let's do what's right for the business. So the shame on them too for falling prey to this. But man, I just haven't seen anything like this in my career, where it's just, it's reckless. That's the best word I can think of to describe it. And it may not be intentionally reckless, but it's wreaking havoc on their customers. And yes, they're selling more software, but that you have to ask the question, is it in the best interest of customers? And if they keep doing this, what I worry about is I'm worried that this space is going to become heavily regulated at some point in the future. If they keep doing this stuff and they don't chill out and figure out how to do this better, when I say they, I mean all of us, really, the entire ERP software community. If we don't figure out a better way to do this, the last thing we need is the government to come in and try and solve the problem for us. And I feel like that's where we're headed. If you get these big, massive companies, especially government entities, they start failing in these projects, you're going to see some regulation that's going to happen at some point because of that.
Yeah. Kyler Cheatham in the chat asks a great question. With the POC theory, does that create silos in the organization, ineffective interoperability? I don't think so, because if you bring the whole organization in this together and you say, okay, look, we have a fiduciary responsibility in our organization to not just throw away $100 million. So it's on us to prove the concept and make it work. We want to make it work. That's our goal. But unless we get past this first gate where we've proven that it works, we're not going to move to the second or the third gate or the fourth gate. So it's incumbent upon everybody to really work hard to make this work. When you sign these massive contracts to do a $100 million implementation, 5-year, $10 million subscription fees, if it doesn't work, everyone's still getting paid.
Right.
You got to have some incentive and some deterrent and some consequences in a way. And I think people have to earn the next steps. And then Ghassan says he's not surprised if 40% of the paid for features subscriptions are not used by organizations. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a company called Panaya out of Israel that I think was acquired by Infosys and then again spun out. But they used to analyze what code is actually being executed after an SAP upgrade. And you'd be shocked that, and I remember these reports, the most used features, the code was getting executed by maybe 10 or 12% of the people that actually did the upgrades. So everybody thinks they're doing these upgrades to get all this new functionality. But in many cases, they're only doing a technical upgrade just to stay supported. They're not taking advantage of any of the new customers, any of the new features and functionality, any of the new capabilities. They just want to get live. And they're not using any of these features and functionalities. So it questions, again, the ROI and the value proposition. But great questions from the audience.
What do you think it is?
We're not getting to every one of them.
No, that's all right. So back to Ghassan's comment though. What do you think that number is? He said he's not surprised that 40% for paid feature subscriptions are not used by organizations. Do you think that's a good number? Do you think it's higher or lower than that?
I think it's much higher than that. I mean, I remember the Panaya numbers were closer to 90% not used.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So
Philip Byers says only 12%, and I'm talking about, just to be clear, only 12% of that code was actually getting executed when Panaya would look at these upgrades. And these were upgrades to enhancement packs, to support packs, to new releases.
Right. So we've talked about the cartel and sort of what's happening here behind the scenes, or it's really not behind the scenes. It's just part of the industry. But why do you think vendors are doing this? Like and I think you've alluded to it, but I'll just ask the question more explicitly. Why do you think SAP, Oracle, all the big vendors are doing this?
I think there's a massive pressure from Wall Street you see, once you get a customer in a subscription-based contract, where you've got annual recurring revenue, ARR, and the switching costs are so high with SAP and Oracle due to the complexity of the product. So SAP ECC6 might be the most complex application software ever written in the history of the world, with 400 million lines of code. And that's one of the reasons why we love it. It's like a Swiss Army knife. There's so many things you can do with it, but be careful as well. Buyer beware. You can't have these wild, wild west runaway projects where they're not controlled and everybody just goes and does their own thing and you never get live. You have to have a plan of what you're going to do and when you're going to get live. But SAP and Oracle clearly want to move to be all cloud, all subscription, all ARR, like Salesforce and Workday, so they could show that they're making a lot more profit on a per customer basis, and their stock will go up. And by the way, it would make sense. It would be great for everybody in a way if the cloud products worked and were successful and were easy to implement. And the jury's still out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And again, we would want that to work, because it would be a lot of business for us.
Right. Well, and you talk a lot about Workday and Salesforce in comparison to SAP and Oracle. And I think the big difference with Salesforce and Workday is that they're native cloud solutions, right? They were built from the cloud from the very start, way before cloud was a thing, such a big thing as it is now. Whereas SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, all these guys now are trying to figure out how do we take our legacy on-prem solutions and turn it into a cloud solution. And so I think that's the awkward phase that I think the industry is going for. You're going
Yeah,
through.
and if you think about now, Gartner has this great concept called composable ERP, where you kind of keep your core ERP and you innovate around the edges with true cloud companies. And we have SAP customers that have replaced the SAP core HCM with SuccessFactors, which is a cloud subscription-based company that's also owned by SAP. So that's a way that you can go to the cloud. In my opinion, when people talk about the cloud, they're talking mostly about the big three hyperscalers, AWS, GCP, and Azure. And if you can move your data center to the cloud, forgetting about applications for a minute, you can run your on-prem SAP or your on-prem Oracle in the cloud on AWS, Azure, GCP, and that kind of gets you to the cloud. That gets you to going digital. So you can kind of check the box and say, hey, I'm going there. I'm doing some things. I'm doing some really good things. But when you're talking about application software or database, and you have to do a massive rip and replace implementation on software that's run your company successfully, everything in your company for 10, 20 years, it's a big undertaking. And these projects can be $100 million with massive risk instead of, just moving from your data center to a cloud vendor.
Right. Now, here's an interesting question from Ryan. I'm going to see if I can show. I can't show the whole question, but I'll read it anyway. But Ryan says on LinkedIn and various other industries like video and audio production, e-commerce, marketing, et cetera, people talk. If there were softwares that failed as often as SAP seems to fail, no one would ever use them, and it'd be widely known in those communities to not use that product. What keeps customers buying into ERP systems that so often fail, especially now?
Yeah, on the SAP side, you have to ask the honest question: what's your choice? If you're a big company, so SAP's kind of owned the market for manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory for big companies, let's say over $1 billion in annual revenue. You've got products out there that say that they do it, like NetSuite. You've got Microsoft Dynamics coming upstream a little bit, but is there another big ERP provider for manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory besides essentially Oracle and SAP? So I think the net is you don't have a lot of choice.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be that way forever. What if Salesforce.com decided to roll up a bunch of their competitors and not just do CRM, but let's say they did HCM. Let's say they combined with Workday. Let's say they combined with a bunch of other ERP vendors and created a true built from the ground up cloud-based manufacturing, distribution, supply chain, inventory system. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I just recently, over the weekend, actually, I just watched a movie. My wife and I watched this movie I think it was on Netflix. It's called Blackberry. Have you seen it? It's about the Blackberry device and the rise and fall of the company. And it's really interesting. Being a Crossing the Chasm kind of guy, you would like the movie. It's really well done. And it's about, it's a fiction, it's not fictional. It's based on reality, but it's reenacted. Of course, it's not a real documentary. But they talk about how BlackBerry was the only option for a long time. And then all of a sudden iPhone came along. They didn't view it as a threat and they didn't respond quick enough. And I think part of me does wonder if that's going to happen to SAP. I think SAP has such a corner on that big market that you're talking about that it's really opening up opportunities for a Salesforce. Or I think that's why Salesforce has come to prominence in the first place. Same with Workday. They're creating they're chipping away at the big, massive behemoths, and they're providing better solutions that are more focused and not trying to be everything to everyone, more flexible, more nimble. They're more cloud-based. So I'd be curious to see where the industry stands in, say, 10 years or so, because I think you'll see a shakeup of these big incumbents. Because I think when you don't have competition, people will disagree with me in the SAP community, but you're going to lose innovation when you don't have that sort of competition. If they don't start to feel that pain, I think that could limit some of the.
Yeah. And keep in mind, what the SAP software does is amazing. And I don't think a lot of these other companies have 400 million lines of code and, have done so many things for so many different industries and blah, 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 but it's complicated. I love Arun's comment here. I wonder if you could put that one up on the screen. It's a long one. The
long
long time
nature.
nature of these projects and high employee turnover lead to organizations just choosing technical upgrades to be safe and put process upgrades to after the technology upgrade. But I fear that they don't follow through with all the needed process. I couldn't agree more. So when you talk about upgrades, you can do like brownfield, greenfield, or even what I like called bluefield. So brownfield is really you upgrade, you kind of do a technical upgrade like Arun's talking about, and you bring across all your same customizations and everything, and you just do it to get it done. And then you start thinking about what's the new functionality I can take advantage of. And Arun makes a point that a lot of customers never get to that new functionality because it's taken them so long just to get the upgrade done that they're just done with it. They're like, okay, I've got the upgrade done. I've just bought myself 5 more years of support. And so now I'm going to take a deep breath, but I'm really not getting the value of why I even did the upgrade. If you think about upgrades, you should never, ever do a software upgrade unless one of 3 things are going to happen. And you should have a business case that details one or more of these 3 things before the project's even approved. You should be able to get an increase in your revenue. You should be able to cut your costs or take market share from your competitors. You should not have to do these upgrades just because they're forced upgrades from the vendor to stay supported. And that's what I think we've really lost in the software space. When I was part of PeopleSoft in 1993, we were a $30 million company. 8 years later, we were a $2 billion company, and I think we were sold to Oracle for $10 billion after that. Customers loved, they were good paying their maintenance because they were getting so many new features and functionality every year. But today, this software is extremely mature. And some people say, what else can you do to supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, inventory that hasn't already been done? And am I really going to use it? What I like about this concept of bluefield is you're doing the technical upgrade, but you're also taking advantage of some of the new features and functionality. And I think there's a move towards doing more of that.
Right. Right. Now, here's another interesting comment from Arun on LinkedIn. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and the audience's thoughts here. But Arun says, I think companies like Tesla did build an in-house ERP system that fit their needs best, and that might be an option for the real big organizations to get the best value from the software they rely on daily. Do you think is custom software? Is that an option? Is that a thing? Do you think that's
I've got a good story about that. I created a great relationship at a conference with the CIO of Costco. Does everybody shop at Costco? I'll come right out with it, and I'll admit I love Costco.
Yeah,
I love Costco. I love getting everything from Costco. If I can get a computer from Costco, a dishwasher from Costco, anything from Costco, I'm doing it. And they may not have as big a choice as some of the other competitors. But what I know is that if that TV breaks in 4 years, I can just call up the warehouse. They're going to say, bring it in. I'm going to give you a brand new one. No problem. So their customer support is just unbelievably great, which is why I like Costco. So I met the CIO of Costco at the time. They were a $140 billion company, I believe. And I'm like, wow, this is great. They must have so much SAP and Oracle. They were in-house running a custom software for a $140 billion company. This might have been 5 years ago, but they decided to go SAP. They decided to eventually go SAP. I'm not sure where they are on their journey, but I'm guessing they're either live or getting live with pieces of the organization. But they were running essentially a $140 billion organization on homegrown software. So it's possible, but very few $100 billion companies do it.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of resources and whatnot. But, you bring up an interesting point when you talk about the service and the competitive advantage that Costco has. And you have to ask yourself, well, what, not that you need to necessarily have an entirely custom solution for your entire operations, but there might be part of your business where SAP is not going to work, Oracle is not going to work, Microsoft's not going to work. And, there, to some degree, there are best practices, there's off the shelf, functionality that can improve many of your processes, but a lot of your processes might actually get watered down if you just defer to the software too much. So I think it's being selective in how you potentially use custom options or third-party bolt-ons or whatever the case may be to make a solution that works for you and gives you a leg up. And I love those 3 things you mentioned, that the only reason you should be upgrading or implementing any sort of technology is if it accomplishes those 3 things, but you shouldn't do it just because you have to or because a vendor's telling you should.
Yeah, the ideal state, the promise of cloud software is that it can be plug and play. But
Right.
we all know that almost none of this software is plug and play today. The
Right.
idea is that you can buy manufacturing software and it's going to work for every manufacturer, and all you have to do is configure it and make it work for you. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Will we get there someday? I don't know. There's a lot of big companies trying to get there, trying to work on it. But I think my message to the crowd is you've got to manage your risk. And if I look at that 12-minute video of yours, Eric, where it talks about the number of failures, it's a possibility that it could fail. And if it fails, how do you manage that risk? And, you've heard of CIOs losing their jobs. Companies have to restate their earnings because of some of these massive ERP failures. So you really have to think through it before you just say, oh, yeah, of course, I'm going to go to that next new product line from Oracle or SAP.
Yeah. And I think the difference, failures have always been a challenge since you and I have been doing this, but the difference with failures lately are a little more concerning in that there's so many new reasons why the projects are failing. I mean, it's always been like, if you don't implement right, you don't have the right project governance, if you're not willing to change, if you don't have good program management, all that stuff can lead to failure. That's always been the case. But now you're running into cases where the product just isn't ready for prime time. You've got a cloud solution that you've been forced to upgrade to, and that cloud solution, in the case of the legacy on-prem providers, their new cloud solutions are not as mature. They might have newer stuff like AI and some of the stuff you're talking about, but then they're missing some basic functionality that, for example, SAP ECC has, because they've had 20 plus years of perfecting that software for manufacturers, especially.
Great
So
point.
now you get manufacturers that are now trying to go to S/4HANA public cloud. I mean, that's a massive change, and there's a lot of big deficiencies. And the clients that we have that have canceled their SAP projects, it's not for the typical reasons. It's not because, oops, we failed and we need to reset the project. It's, oops, this software just is not going to work for us. I mean, and they pull the plug. And I think you just have to be aware. You have to really poke holes in. I'm not saying don't move forward with S/4HANA, but you've really got to poke holes in it and understand where the gaps are, and to your point, where the risks are.
Well, that's why it might be. If people ask me my personal opinion, I'd take a wait and see attitude until there's so much more proven data that the software works. And if SAP truly wants to get everybody to the public cloud version, which has no ABAP or Z program customizations, let's say, or they don't want them, they've got to prove that there's a lot of people that have done it and done it successfully, and companies that look like yours, they're the same size. They're not new greenfield implementations, some mom and pop shop that's never run SAP before that can check the box and say, oh yeah, I got the public cloud version running and my, annual revenue is 100 million. That's not a good comp. Right. You need other multi-billion dollar companies that are references that have done it in your space before you embark upon that. And in the meantime, again, there's third-party support companies like us that can buy you time to figure out what you want to do. And if you think about a company spending, let's say, $2 million in annual maintenance revenue, they're really spending closer to like $4 million a year when you figure that they have to pay systems integrators to support the custom code. They're constantly having to upgrade just to stay supported. What if those upgrades could go away? And another piece that I don't think I mentioned yet is oftentimes when there's a new fix available, that fix is in another support pack or enhancement pack, which has 200 other fixes in it, or it's in another release, and you're back on the upgrade treadmill. Whereas at Rimini Street, we'll fix that one problem that you have in whatever version of code you have it in, and not force you to regression test 200 other fixes that are going to break everything else in your system. So when you add up those three components of the total cost of ownership, let alone the cost of the maintenance, your 2 million becomes 4 million and our price is 1 million. So what if you could save 3 million a year for 5 years and use that $15 million in savings to plan your S4 upgrade when the software is ready and mature, to your point?
Right.
There's a good financial argument.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. We've talked a lot about SAP, but what about Oracle? This is a question from Michael on LinkedIn. How's Oracle Cloud positioning their software in the manufacturing, distribution, supply chain industry? Are there failures? Are you seeing the same issues, the same cartel-esque sorts of things in the Oracle ecosystem as you are in SAP?
I'm seeing from my vantage point, I'm not seeing as much uptake in Oracle manufacturing, distribution, inventory. I am seeing Oracle being reasonably competitive in their Fusion HCM products, human capital management, and their financials products, and winning deals. And they're doing reasonably well in their Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which you could say is a hyperscaler that competes with AWS, Azure, and GCP. And they really want to bet the farm on things like OCI, and they're getting a decent amount of growth, even though they're not one of the top 3 companies in that space yet.
Right. Here's a question from Gassan. This is a great one, or a comment more than anything. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts here, Sebastian. But he says ERP vendors aren't agile enough to release reliable upgrades with feature benefits, only introducing surface improvements for making more money. That's your Cartel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. This Cartel topic, if you think about it, how does everybody get paid? They only get paid when massive projects are going on. And to Gassan's point, if you're doing a massive project for very, very little ROI, why do it? And I would love to look back on all these cases that had like all this purported ROI. Here's everything we're going to get. We're going to increase our revenue, cut our costs, take market share from our competitors after doing this massive digital transformation to some Oracle or SAP cloud product. And then you look back after it's gotten done, assuming it actually got done, and you say, did we deliver? Did our revenue increase a lot more? Did we cut our costs? Did we take market share from our competitors due to these ERP implementations?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think, the sample size has to include the ones that never got to go live too. You have to look at, the ones that don't ever get there. I think that's the tricky part, is looking at why did these companies fail? What did they do wrong? And kind of the lessons learned from there versus the ones that did get to the finish line. Maybe they got some business value, but not all of it. So
yeah, Philip's got a great point here too. Philip Byers, all implementations I attended had higher FTEs after the implementation. Again, so if the promise is supposed to be you get to do things better, faster, cheaper, and more lean, but yet you have a massive new workforce after the implementation, that might make sense if you implemented a ton of the new features and functionality and you were bringing massive new capabilities to your organization that were driving a lot more revenue streams. Let's say they could increase your revenue 10 or 20%, but your FTEs only went up 5%. That sounds like a good business case, but I don't think that's what Philip's talking about.
Right. Here's an interesting question from Arturo on YouTube. Arturo says, good morning. I work for a small water and sewer district in Southern California, and we need to change our ERP. What resources do you offer special districts? Is it specific to Oracle and SAP? I can speak for Third Stage. We do not provide only services related to Oracle and SAP. We are not affiliated with any software vendors, and we always help clients define their digital strategy, select the software, and then ultimately implement whatever software it is. So I think that's the beauty of this conversation and having the two of us here, is both of our companies are independent, right? I mean, Rimini Street, Third
100%.
Stage Consulting, we're not affiliated with these vendors. We are trying to help companies navigate the vendors and their products and the implementations and the challenges that go along with that, but we're not affiliated with them. And I think that independence and that objective, agnostic view of the world is what's so important here.
100%. And by the way, we're not affiliated with each other.
Right.
So no money changes hands between Third Stage and Rimini Street. We don't pay them to bring us customers. They don't pay us to bring them customers. But I see them as a good value company that I think our customers would love. And I think they see us the same way. And so we're just trusted advisors. That's what we really want to be. We want to be trusted advisors in a customer or client's ERP journey. And, when you're quote unquote part of that cartel, it's really hard to get an unbiased opinion because, again, you got to bring it back to the fact that people get paid for these massive projects. Yeah. So sometimes you're going to do an upgrade for the sake of an upgrade, not because there's a real business case to actually do it.
Yeah.
And so I would strongly recommend that customers have independent, agnostic, trusted advisor people. Just get a second opinion.
Right. Yeah, and
That's
I
all.
think that's one thing you and I violently agree on is we should not, you and I and our company should not be exchanging money. And we're the same way with every software vendor. I mean, we get software vendors all the time. They're like, hey, if what if we give you 10% of the cloud subscription every time you recommend our product? And I always say no. I'm like, yeah, that'd be an easy way to make a quick buck for sure. I mean, we could ramp up our profitability and our revenue probably a lot faster if we did that.
Yep.
But it's not true to our values. It's not true to who we are. And by the way, the minute you start exchanging money, these little side deals, things get weird. I start focusing more on you, Sebastian, in terms of how can I make you happy so I can make more money off you, and I'm not focused on the customer. And we make our money off the customers, right? They're the ones paying us, so they're not
Yeah,
happy. We're not giving them objective advice.
we're a
We're
little
screwed.
over, but I have time, and I think you have time, Eric. I'm going to answer kind of a fun question off the beaten
Sure.
path. Gassan asks why the name Rimini Street, and I call it Rimini Street. But anytime I travel outside of the United States, everyone calls it Rimini Street because there's a very famous beach in Italy called Rimini Beach, and
Oh.
it's kind of a resort town. And you just cannot correct anybody outside of the United States and say it's Rimini. We used to do that in the early days, but it's Rimini. It's like tomato. Call us whatever you want. And we got the name because our CEO lived on a street called Rimini Street, and he was looking at all these names to name the company. And I don't think he liked all the ones that were coming up that people were coming up with. And he said, you know what? Let's try this Rimini Street. And we've had a nice time with plays, riffs on it, if you will. Like, hey, save yourself $5 million a year. Take a walk down Rimini Street for 5 years and pocket 25 million to go to your bottom line or fund your next digital transformation. So we've had some fun with it. We have our product is that everybody files cases is called Street Central. We've had a good time with it, but it is a different name.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've got a question for you that it touches on some of the other questions from the audience too. But how can enterprise technology customers fight back? We're talking about the cartel and sort of the forced upgrades and the challenges, the risks, lack of ROI, all these different challenges, right? So what do customers do? Because you mentioned the fact that what option do you have, for example, with SAP? If you're a big company, you have to use SAP, and if they're telling you have to upgrade, right? And so there's sort of a helpless feeling that I think a lot of the market has right now. But how do we empower these enterprise tech buyers? Like, what advice can you give?
Yeah, well, you don't have to upgrade. You can come to a company like Rimini Street. And by the way, if you come to us, you can upgrade. We've had hundreds of customers upgrade under our support. When you leave, if you're on like a release of Oracle database, like 11 and 12, 11G or 12C, you have access to 19 and 21. 19 is like the longer term release that is the one that people would go to. 21's an innovation release. At the end of this year, 23 is going to come out, which is the next long-term release. And by the way, SAP and Oracle are, for their newer releases, I think for S/4HANA, SAP has announced that with 23, they're not going to come out with a release every year. It's going to be every 2 years, and they're going to support it for 7 years instead of 5 years. Mm-hmm. So they're somewhat getting the message, but that doesn't help all those customers that went live on 15.11, 16.10, 17.09, 18.09, et cetera. They still have to figure out what they're going to do. But I would play hardball. You're the customer. Everybody should be working so hard to earn your business and not catch you in these gotcha contracts and, this lock-in, and then you have no choice and, oh, sorry. Everybody should have to earn your business. So I would take baby steps in these implementations. And if SAP says, hey, I don't want you going to a third-party company to support ECC6 while you're upgrading to S/4HANA, I think you need to say, too bad. You don't have a choice. And oh, by the way, the only way I'm going to afford this upgrade to S/4HANA is if I cut that 2 million, which is really 4 million, to 1 million a year, and use that 3 million in savings to fund my future cloud transformation with you. So you asked how we help SAP or Oracle at the beginning of this podcast, but that's a way we can really, really help them.
Yeah.
And
especially these big companies that, are being told, what is it? Is it 2027 where everyone on ECC needs to be off? Is that I can't even keep the date straight now.
It's 2027 if you're on Enhancement Pack 6, 7, or 8. It's
Okay.
2025 if you're on ECC 6 enhancement pack less than 6.
Okay. So let's look at the ones that are looking at,
Or you can pay like an uplift to get it to extend it to like 2030. I don't know if that's a 10 or 20% uplift, but that's the other thing they hit you with. You go into this extended support or customer specific maintenance and you get less, or you get the same, or you get less, and they charge you more money. How
yeah,
does that make sense?
right. Here's a great
Yeah,
question from Saul.
great
And
question.
how this is an awesome question. How real is the risk of being on an unsupported version? So let's just say 2025, 2027 comes and goes, and the software we're on is no longer supported. We couldn't get to S/4HANA in time or Oracle Fusion in time, and we're still dependent on these legacy products. They're not supported. What's the downside here? What are we dealing with?
Well, I would ask around your friends, what's the reality? So if you look at Oracle database, any version below 19C is unsupported. Ask around people that run Oracle database, and you'd be amazed at how many are on releases in production live less than 19C. Now, there is a risk, but customers, I guess, manage that risk. Now, if they have Rimini Street, the risk goes way down because we guarantee support on all of those unsupported releases for half the price. We also have security products that work on those unsupported releases, and we provide support for customizations, performance tuning, integrations, interfaces, even how-to questions. So I think the risk is drastically decreased, and we purposely set our company up to minimize that risk. But a lot of customers are doing this without third-party support or without Rimini Street, and it just must show the value that they see in, they don't see the value in going to these new releases, and they can stay on an unsupported release because I'm seeing a ton of it.
Right. Yeah. And we still see, believe it or not, we still see customers, our clients that are successful companies. They're still on AS400 iSeries mainframe based systems. Now, I'm not suggesting let's just wait 30 years before doing anything until it becomes totally obsolete. But all I'm saying is there are companies that are using 30-year-old systems that it's certainly not ideal. I don't recommend that, but they're surviving right now. It's going to be a lot more painful for them to make a jump from an AS400 based system to a public cloud based system. That's a huge jump, and that's very risky. But the reality is these companies have survived and thrived on old systems that are quote unquote not supported or quote unquote, out of the life cycle.
Yeah, I think, Eric, there's two great points here made by Scott and Colleen. Scott says it's one thing to stay long-term on an enterprise software. Maybe they support it. It's the integrations with ancillary components that's the challenge of staying behind. Colleen says, I think the innovations in connectors, API development, Power Platform, a more platform-driven environment is plausible. So I think in some ways, Colleen is answering Scott's question, but there is a lot of concern in tech stack compatibility, hardware, operating system, database, applications, making them all work together. And we've built, there's a lot of, there's the Dell Boomies, there's a lot of connectors, there's this composable ERP, there's taking things out of the core and innovating around the edges. And I think it is possible. And I think that is the future, because otherwise it's just too hard and too complicated to have to do these massive upgrades every 5 years. And let's think about that. So if you had a software product like Database 12.2 that came out in 2017, you're not going to implement it in 2017, right? You're not going to be the first one to go live on a GA product that hasn't been live for maybe you'll wait 1 or 2 years for the bugs to get out of it, right, Eric?
Right.
Makes sense? And
right.
So you would upgrade, let's say, on that 12.2 version in 2019. Let's say you've got 1,000 database instances. That upgrade is going to take you 2 years. You've got many mission critical applications running on these databases. So you finally get live by 2021. And then all of a sudden, that massive upgrade that you did is now unsupported in 2022 because it's only got a 5-year support lifespan. I think the model is just 100% broken.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work this way.
Yeah.
It's so hard to stay current given these policies.
Well, and not to mention that technology changes so fast, and it's changing faster. It's accelerating the pace of change. But organizations themselves have not necessarily increased their ability to change quickly, at least not as much as technology is changing. So I think that's part of the challenge too, which is not really a technical issue. It's it's just an organizational human issue too. But that's a whole nother topic for another another discussion at some point. Here's a really interesting point. I feel like I'm glad Ghassan brings this up because I feel like we kind of have to talk about Y2K to put this all in context. So Ghassan says, just like the Y2K risk of not adding the century date field. I've always thought, I'm glad he brings this up. Thank you, Ghassan. I'm curious to hear what you think, Sebastian. But one thing I've always thought is Y2K was a great sales message for the enterprise tech space from the vendor perspective. They essentially forced a lot of customers to upgrade in Y2K out of fear. They use that fear of, if you don't upgrade your legacy system, when we switch over to 2000, the 2-digit date is gonna get screwed up. And guess what? Nothing material happened in the world when Y2K flipped over, by the way, which would suggest that it might have been a hoax. But I feel like this is sort of like another manufactured Y2K. Like, we have to move to the cloud now. We just have to do it now. And you made the point earlier that investors love it. Wall Street loves it. That's the real driver here. So we're creating this panic and this fear and confusion and chaos in the market, all because the vendors want to satisfy their investors. But what are your thoughts? Is this sort of like Y2K all over again, or how
I call this unprecedented FOMO? Fear of missing out.
Right.
My fear of missing out on going digital, going cloud, getting AI. And you just have to understand that so many of these promises are in their nascency. They're not even built out in these products. And, there's complications and there's challenges, even with things like ChatGPT that some organizations have banned from their internal companies from using. So look, the promise and the idea and, things like machine learning to map the human genome are unbelievable. But you have to just understand what it's going to do for your company and when, and what the investment is and what the return on that investment is going to be. There will no doubt be exponential benefits from a lot of these technologies. You just have to be smart enough about if, when, why, how, and what's the return.
Right.
And you can't just willy-nilly say, oh, we got to go cloud. And then cloud is not cloud is not cloud. We got to go cloud. What does that mean? Does that mean that I move my data center to the cloud? Does that mean that I change my on-prem applications to cloud applications? Does that mean that I'm now doing generative AI? What am I doing? And why? And why is one? How do you prioritize all these things for your business? And again, that prioritization needs to increase revenue, cut costs, or take market share from competitors. There's a fourth one that often comes up, and that is preventing an unmitigated disaster. And sometimes that can work as well. Right.
So you sort of lead into a capstone question here to sort of put a bow on all this conversation here in terms of, the challenges in the market and the forced upgrades and the whole cartel aspect of the market. But what first steps should customers, what should they do? So we're talking about all these risks and challenges and things to be aware of. Let's just say I'm in a position where I've got a system that I know is going to be not supported at some point soon, and I know I need to do something, and I'm just getting started on my journey. Like, how do you recommend that we get started on those journeys?
I think you have to really think about what you're trying to accomplish. How is what you're going to do with IT? Are you doing this because you want to retire technical debt because you're nervous? That's a different conversation. Then, are you doing this to meet the needs of the CEO, like the three main goals of the CEO, whatever that is for your company? Can a ERP migration help me get there? And then before you embark on it, before you sign any contracts, you have to really, really map out exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I think you have to manage your risk. And that means you have to minimize your risk, in my opinion, and you have to take baby steps. Big software vendors are not going to like that. They want to sell you massive contracts. They want to lock you in for a 5-year deal. They don't want to talk about what would happen if it fails, it shouldn't fail, that type of thing. Systems integrators will be the same way. But I wouldn't do that. I would say, hey, we're all in this together and we're going to earn it one step at a time.
Right. And I would add to that too. I totally agree with everything you said. I would add one thing, which is, look at your options and objectively assess your options, right? Because you have the option of, you certainly have the option. You always have the option of saying, okay, I'm just going to do a big, massive upgrade right now, largely because my system is being sunset. My legacy system is being sunset. So here's one option. I could go through this big, massive upgrade, replace everything now because the vendors tell me I have to get off the system by 2025 or whatever. Another option might be, well, what if I look for third-party support and I extend that timeline? Not because I want to take forever to implement, but because I want to be more targeted. I want to be more deliberate. I want to go at my pace and wait, take somewhat of a wait and see approach, more of a conservative approach, I'd say. What does that look like? What is the cost benefit of that scenario? And what's the risk of that scenario versus the risk of the big bang? Let's just go rip everything out and replace it now. So I think just looking objectively at your options and not feeling like you have to go one path. And I think that's what the market's doing is they're trying to force everyone onto the same on-ramp and upgrade now to the cloud, ideally public cloud, and do it now. I mean, that's what they want, right? So that's what you're going to hear in the market is that's what you should do. But what we're saying is that you don't have to. This is your business and treat it accordingly and do what's right for you.
Yeah. And you have to manage your risk. And, Eric, this is my first podcast with you, but I love your audience. The questions, you've got really smart people with all these questions. I look at more of these questions from Arun and everybody, and we could talk for hours together on these really, really great ideas. And Arun talks about bad process and just doing a technical upgrade, and you're not really getting any benefit if you do that. You should focus on process upgrades. And he's right. But then the question comes, is your custom code in like your ABAP and your Z program customizations better than the process improvements that the vendor put in the cloud version, or is their process better? And it's not always the vendor's is better. Oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes the code that you originally wrote is actually better than the code that you see in the new vendor upgrade. And that makes it much more challenging as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a great audience. You've been a great guest, great questions, a lot of stuff we didn't get to. In fact, you and I had sort of talked about the different topics we're going to cover. I think we covered a lot of it, but there's a lot we didn't cover. There's a lot of audience questions we didn't cover, which can only mean one thing. And that is we need to have you back on the show to pick up this conversation at some point.
Would love to. And thanks for having me. And thank you, audience, for having such a great discussion with us, even though it wasn't live. It would be great to have the audience live and not have to just do chat at some point too. But anyway, thanks so much. I don't want to take the rest of everybody's day. Eric, love what you do and keep doing it. And, let's see collectively if we can help everybody get to their ERP dreams, whatever they may be.
Yeah, that utopia, that desired future state that makes sense for them. So appreciate having you on. You've been a great guest, and you guys are doing cool stuff in the market. Even though we're not affiliated, we're both independent. And we have similarities in our business models. So I think that's great stuff. So stay tuned for another follow-up with having you on the show. We'll get him back on as soon as we can. So thanks again for being here. Thank you to the audience for being here today. And if you know anyone that you work with or work for that might be interested in this conversation, just pass the link on to them. I'd love for you to share this with as many people as possible. So have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. And we do this live podcast interview every Tuesday, same time, same place. So be sure to join us for future live discussions as well. And this live discussion will get packaged up and made part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast full episodes that come out every Wednesday. So a week from tomorrow, Wednesday, whatever that date is, that I guess that would be October 3rd, I guess it is, would be the or 4th. If I had a calendar in front of me, it's the first Wednesday of October, you'll find this podcast episode with this interview. So thank you everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric.
Right. Thanks, Sebastian.